Hello, hello. Welcome to the Project Success Cooking Certificate. My name is James, and if we haven't met before, I am the teacher of the Project Success Cooking Certificate. So the Project Success Cooking Certificate is run, as you might gather, by Project Success, which is a youth development nonprofit based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. When we are all able to get together, we meet every Wednesday night from 6 o'clock until 8 o'clock, and during that time we learn how to cook. When I say we, I mean teenagers, specifically people who are enrolled in Minneapolis public high schools who are part of partner high schools with Project Success. However, for the past few weeks, we obviously haven't been able to get together in person, so we've been getting together on Instagram Live, and then tonight also on YouTube Live. So to prepare you for this, we are going to be doing YouTube Live exclusively, starting either next week or the week after that. So that way, when we're done with an evening, instead of just saving the video to stories and just letting it live there for 24 hours, the entire video will be available on YouTube for whenever we need it in the future. So this week, we're focusing on something that we've been looking at for the past couple of weeks, which is staples. Last week we prepared pad thai, which is a Thai dish that is prepared using staples that people keep in their pantries in Thailand. However, this week we're preparing something that has become very fashionable here in North America over the last few weeks, which is baking bread and stew. In other words, comfort foods for a lot of people. The bread we're going to be baking today is called a no-knead bread, not N-O-N-E-E-D, N-O-K-N-E-A-D. When you knead bread, it just means that you're taking your hands and you're working the dough until eventually it's the consistency that you want it to be before you put it in the oven. However, this particular bread is created not to need any kneading. I'll show you what it looks like. So here's one I made earlier. This is what it looks like. I'm showing the Instagram camera. I'm showing the YouTube camera. This is what it looks like. Here's what it looks like on the inside. So it's not your typical sort of bread shape. It depends on what's typical for you, though, I guess. But what I love about it is it's super easy, unless, of course, you don't have access to yeast, which many of us don't right now. Yeast is very hard to come by in the Twin Cities at the moment, and I would imagine outside of the Twin Cities as well. So when you have instant yeast again, you'll be able to make this with us. After I finish preparing the bread, we are going to cover it, and we're going to keep it covered for 18 hours. I'm not going to film all 18 hours. That would be ridiculous. However, what you can do is you can let it prove overnight. Prove is another term that is used exclusively in baking. It's a stage in baking, which is very important. Let's dig in. Okay, so we're going to prepare the bread first today, and then we're going to move into the beef stew that we're going to be making. Let's start out with a bowl. So the bowl that I'm going to be using today is a Tupperware bowl. The reason why I'm using this particular bowl is because of the size of it, but also because it's easy for me to cover. If you don't have a Tupperware bowl this size, you can use any mixing bowl, just cover it then with plastic wrap. So I'm going to use this lid once we have our dough inside of it. So the first step in preparing this dough is just sort of normal all-purpose flour. So I keep mine up here in this container. It looks kind of weird. At one point, I ran a nonprofit theater for Twin Cities teenagers, and so we use this to collect donations, which is why it says donations here. But since then, I covered up the coin slot with duct tape, and now it's where I keep my flour and my memories of running a Twin Cities theater company. So I'm going to use this flour in our dough. Specifically, I'm going to use 3 cups of it. So you want to, as with any baking, try to be as exact as you can. So I'm going to get a nice flat top to my flour here. You don't want a big bulge, otherwise it's imprecise. And baking is a lot more like precise chemistry than cooking is, which is one of the reasons why I'm not so good at it. One of the things you may have noticed if you've joined me on more than one evening is that I improvise a lot when I cook. And so if you too like to improvise a lot when you cook, then maybe baking is not your favorite either. So I got my flour The next ingredient is salt. So here's mine. I'm just using Morton iodized salt, so nothing fancy this time. I love to use sea salt in my cooking, but not so much in my baking. I'm going to grab a teaspoon measure because I'm going to use 1.5 teaspoons. This is actually a 1/2 teaspoon measure. So I'm going to add 3 of these because 3/2 is 1.5. There we go, there's my salt. And then the last and most important ingredient here of the dry ingredients is instant yeast. I got to thank Andy, who works for Project Success, for the loan of the, well, let's face it, the gift of this yeast. I couldn't find any in the stores this week. So maybe this will be a recipe that you can prepare with yeast that you already have at home, or maybe you're just going to have to wait until yeast comes back into our stores again. We're going to be using just a 1/2 teaspoon of yeast. You don't need very much. The yeast is what you use to make the bread rise. And without it, your bread will just harden like a pancake. Like a hard pancake? Who is having hard pancakes? That sounds super gross. Okay, so now that we've got our dry ingredients in here, I'm just going to use a fork. You could use a whisk, use whatever you like, to combine our dry ingredients really well. I actually quite like using a whisk, but because I know I'm going to be eating with this fork later on, I'm minimizing my dishes. That's something I do a lot because nobody loves doing the dishes. I don't know, maybe some people do. Sometimes I'll put on a podcast, maybe a podcast made by Project Success, and I will use that as a way to sort of forget about the fact that I'm doing the dishes. It's not a very zen thing to do, to forget about what you're in the process of doing. Okay, I've got my dry ingredients all mixed together. Next, I'm going to take 1.5 cups of water. Here's my measurement for water. I had it somewhere over here before. Oh, here we go. I put it in the sink so I wouldn't forget where it was. So I'm going to fill this up with 1.5 cups. It doesn't matter the temperature of the water. That's 1 cup. And I'm going to add another 1/2 cup. There we go. Now, if this was a bread that required kneading at this point, I would mix together the ingredients and then I'd have to really get my hands in there and work the dough a lot. But we're not going to be doing that today. We're just going to use a wooden spoon. I'll use this one. And I'm going to mix all of the ingredients together. The dough is going to be pretty wet. If you've ever made bread before, then maybe you're accustomed to a much drier dough than the one that we're going to be working with today. This one is going to be a real mess when we're done with mixing it together. It's not going to look pretty. It won't look anything like bread. You maybe won't believe that it'll work, but it will. I have to credit, as I'm mixing this dough together, I have to credit the source of the recipe. This comes from A Pinch of Yum, which is actually a local blog / website / Instagram presence. And they publish a lot of really great recipes. They've been my source for a lot of recipes during this time when we've been on hiatus from the Project Success Institute, because typically their recipes don't require very many ingredients. And because grocery shopping is more challenging right now than it has been in the past, I'm grateful for that. So I'll show you what I'm looking at here. So this is the YouTube camera. Here is the Instagram camera. There you go. So now what I'm going to do is I am going to cover up our dough here. Just like that. And I'm going to leave it for 18 hours at room temperature. So I'm not looking to put this in the fridge. I'm not looking to put it in the oven for sure. I'm just going to put it on top of my fridge. That's where I have space. I'll be right back. There we go. Bread's done for now. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to begin work on my beef stew here. So this is a recipe that comes to us from Meal Line. Anybody who's talked to me for any length of time at all has heard me proselytize about the virtues of Meal Line. If you don't know what it is, it's a meal service. So it's like HelloFresh or something like that. Only instead of having to order the ingredients from them and then having to pay the extra money and all that extra packaging, you can just put together a week of meals based upon the pictures and the recipes that you see on the website. They help you then by putting together a shopping list, and then you can use that shopping list to get everything that you need and prepare the meals on your own schedule. I love it. It's great, and I feel like I've become a much better cook as a result of Mealime. So there's my plug for Mealime today. The first thing that we're going to do is we are going to take a mixing bowl. This is the size I'm going to use. You can use any size you like. And I am going to mix together 1/4 of a cup of flour. So we're going back to that weird container that I was using for flour again. And if you have a 1/4 cup measurement, you can use that. I use my 1/4 cup measurement for my cat food, and so I'm not going to use that right now because it's inside the bag still. But there you go. Because we're cooking, it's not so important that we're precise. So now I've got my flour. Next, we're going to add some salt. Once again, it says that we need about 1/2 teaspoon. You know I like my salt. And also, we're cooking, so I don't have to be precise. All right, so next I'm going to grab some black pepper. I've got this stuff here, so I'm going to grind that in there. Maybe you have one of those big pepper grinders. That's a life goal for me to have one of those. I always feel like such an elegant addition to any meal to just sort of grab one of those big things that they have at restaurants and grind pepper in there. So now that I've got that, I'm going to mix it all together. My salt, my flour, my pepper. And now I'm going to take the meat that I'm going to be using today. So this is really any kind of beef that you can find and that seems like a good price to you. When I'm making a stew, I don't focus on the fanciest cuts of beef. I'm not looking for the finest steak because I'm going to be cooking it with a gravy. Yes, I'm cooking it with a gravy and also a gravy. And so I know that I don't need the finest cut of steak. Even if I did need the finest cut of steak, I probably still wouldn't use it. So I'm going to empty this in there. The recipe calls for 1/4 pound or a pound. I'm using a pound and a little bit more because I like it. It's good stuff. And now what I'm doing is I'm coating the beef with the flour. There's a couple reasons for that. One of them is that because we've added that salt and pepper, it's now sticking to the outside of the steak, which is going to allow it to be more flavorful. But also, when we cook it in the stew, that flour that is coating it right now is going to join some of the broth that we're going to use to thicken the gravy. You maybe you like a thick gravy, maybe you don't. I like a thicker gravy, and so as much flour as I can get to stick to this beef as possible, the better. And when I'm done, it looks like this. Okay, so now because I've been touching raw meat, I'm going to wash my hands. I think that was roughly 20 seconds. I was kind of singing Happy Birthday in my head. Maybe, I wonder if people have figured out better songs to sing during this time when we're all washing our hands so much more than we ordinarily do. Happy Birthday is not exactly a jam, you know? Like I heard that Stayin' Alive, the Bee Gees song, like the entire chorus is about as much time as you need, but doesn't that depend on the tempo? I mean, if you bring like, staying alive. I don't know. Like it feels like if you're doing a slow version, maybe you end up washing your hands too much and they get all wrinkled. Anyway, all right. So our beef is ready to cook, but before we do that, we're going to chop the vegetables that we're going to be putting in our stew. So I'm going to start out with the potatoes. The recipe calls for some yellow potatoes. They were all out of stock. So I'm using some gold creamer potatoes. They look like this. They're just little potatoes. And so I don't have to chop them into as many pieces as I would if I were using a larger potato. In fact, I think I'm probably just going to cut these in half or in fourths. As you saw, I used a lot of meat there, so I'm going to be using a little bit more potatoes than they call for. They ask for 2 of these average sized yellow potatoes, and this is probably a little bit more than that, but I'm good with it. I like potatoes. There's no real drawback to using more potatoes in your recipe than is called for, except that potatoes can be kind of absorbent sometimes. And so if you don't want the gravy to be completely absorbed, maybe don't use a ton of potatoes. You'll notice I'm leaving the skin on my potatoes. This particular kind of potato you can do that with. And so for that reason, I'm not too worried about using extra potatoes because a lot of the surface area of the potato is covered by skin. So it's harder for the potatoes to absorb the gravy. It also sometimes takes a little bit longer to cook, which is why I'm cutting and quartering these, because I don't want to have to cook them forever and ever. But I don't mind having a larger piece of potato in my stew. If you prefer to have smaller pieces, then you can make your potatoes as small as you like. You could dice them. I don't think I would recommend mincing them. That would be like having mashed potato in your stew, which is not something I've ever tried. That would be kind of weird, wouldn't it? Just to get a mouthful of mashed potatoes and it would all stick to the bottom of your bowl. At least that's what I assume would happen. Okay, potatoes are cut. So next, I am going to do the same thing with a stalk of celery. Celery is one of my favorite things to chop. It always makes me feel like such an expert because it's easy to do. And again, my potatoes off my cutting board. Just then when I moved that bowl off my drying rack, I thought, uh-oh, what if I start an avalanche of dishes? I'm just convinced that one of these days I'm going to be cooking in my kitchen and y'all are going to see something that happens in the background and be like, oh no, it's on fire, James, turn around. And I won't be able to tell. So here's my celery stalk. I'm going to chop off one end of it, the thicker end, because that doesn't taste so good. And it actually looks like I'm going to do the other one too, because it looks a little dirty. I've already washed this, but I'm going to give it another rinse because I noticed that it needed it. And then I'm going to place it on my cutting board, and I'm going to place the tip of my knife down like this. I could put my fingertip at the top if I want to. And then I'm going to hold onto this using the claw technique, keeping my fingertips out of the way as I work the blade along the celery like this. As I said, it always makes me feel like I'm a much better cook than I am because it's so easy to cut. If it's taking you a little longer, don't worry. It just means you need to spend a little bit more time chopping celery. If you are my age, then when I said chopping celery, then maybe the first thing that came into your mind was a comedian named Dana Carvey singing chopping broccoli. If you are younger than me, then you have no idea what I'm talking about, which makes it probably pretty similar to any experience watching me do anything. Okay, so my celery is chopped. And I'm checking my recipe now because I want to see at what stage I'm going to add my celery. If I add it before my potatoes, then I don't want to put it in the same bowl as my potatoes because otherwise I'm going to have to pick them all out in order to add them. But I do want to minimize my dishes if I can, so if I'm adding them both at the same time, there's no harm in putting them both in the same bowl. Let me check and see. Yeah, it looks to me like I add them at the same time as everything else, which is not super common. Oftentimes you will cook celery first. You might cook it along with onions or garlic. Sometimes you'll cook it along with carrots. We've talked about this before, particularly when you're making some pasta sauces. You'll use little tiny pieces of celery as part of the aromatics to make everything smell good and release that good aroma into your food as you're cooking. But in this case, we're going to be adding a lot of our vegetables at the same time. So next, I'm going to chop my carrots. These are the carrots I'm using today. I was at the grocery store. The only ones they had left were juicing carrots. I don't really know the difference. It looks like a regular carrot to me. They've already been washed, but they have not been peeled. One of the things that when I was a kid, I always did, it was my job to peel the carrots for anything we were cooking. And there are many things that you need to peel a carrot for. However, for a stew, you don't. The only difference is that it's just maybe like the tiniest bit chewier when you're finished cooking, but it's so slight that I've prepared recipes for people before without peeling carrots in a stew and they haven't noticed. So, or if they have, they were very polite. So I'm not going to peel my carrot. Instead, I'm just going to cut both ends, and I'm going to cut it fairly thin, so that way, once again, the carrot cooks more quickly, and the skin isn't going to keep it from cooking in any way at all. Carrots are just slightly less satisfying to chop than celery, and because they are round, they roll all over the place and get in the way. Of course, if you prefer, one thing that I've seen people do before is they will take the tip of their knife and they'll split the carrot so then they have a flat surface, and then they can put those two flat surfaces down, making the carrot safer to chop. It takes twice as long to chop, obviously, because you've cut the carrot in half. But if you're nervous about your fingers, that's a good way to protect them. Of course, you can also do that if you're not a big fan of huge pieces of carrot. I actually am not. I am not the biggest carrot fan in the world. Cooked carrots are not my favorite. I don't mind them in stews and soups and things like that. But I'm never going to ask for an extra helping of just steamed carrots on the side of my food. It's just not my style. And because I'm a grown person, I'm in charge of what I eat, which is a pretty great feeling. So once again, I'm going to split this carrot. I wonder if any of you have been watching cooking shows during this time when you haven't been able to get out and about as much. And if you have any favorites, I can't look right now, but I'll check the comments later and see if you have any recommendations. I'm a big fan of salt, fat, acid, heat. In our classes at the Institute, we talk about that show and that book a lot because I like that way of thinking about composing each meal. Thinking about the salty part of the meal, which fat you're using to cook or to flavor, how you're going to balance the meal with acid, and what kind of heat you're using to prepare the dish. One of the things that a lot of people like about a stew is that it doesn't have a lot of acid balancing things out. It's just a very sort of mellow, comforting kind of flavor. Although technically speaking, carrots are a source of acid. So are onions, which we're going to be using as well. Okay, as I said, the carrots are going to be going in at the same time as the potatoes, at the same time as the celery. Not that one though, that one's going in the trash. I'm not above eating things off the kitchen floor, but this kitchen floor needs a bit of a scrub, so I'm not doing that right now. Boy, this bowl is piled high. Okay. All right, now that we've chopped up our carrots, we're going to move on to garlic. One of my favorite things to chop. I know a lot of y'all, I even saw it in the comments before, I know a lot of y'all prefer garlic press. That's your prerogative. Personally, I love getting to smash the garlic. So I'm going to go and grab my garlic. It's over here. I'll be right back. Oh no! My garlic seems to have gone missing. Oh, here we go. There we go. And two cloves of garlic. I'm going to cut off the top and the bottom. check the consistency of this clove. It feels a little soft to me. I'm going to cut off the part that's a little brown. Everything else is totally fine to eat. Great. And that's a pretty decent sized clove of garlic, so I don't feel too bad about that. There we go. Let's get that good and squashed. There we go. And now I get to work my knife nice and quickly, mincing the garlic. In this case, I would recommend mincing it pretty small. Beef stew is not known for being particularly garlicky. So if somebody gets a mouthful of garlic, they're not going to appreciate that. If it takes you longer to mince the garlic, that's fine. Maybe it takes you less time to mince the garlic. Just remember that when you're mincing your garlic, you're using the V technique, so you keep your fingers out of the way of the blade of the knife. That'll do for me. And then lastly, we're going to be using an onion. Use this one up here before I forget about it. Some of you all might have watched last week and had an onion that was sitting over on the windowsill there that had been waiting so long to be cooked with that it had sprouted. And I wasn't sure if I would still be able to eat it, but I was, as long as I got rid of the parts in the middle. In this case, it was the parts in the middle that were a little funny to eat, and everything else was fine. It is my opinion, not the opinion of Project Success, but it is my opinion that a lot of times we throw away food without really examining it to see whether there's still something that's edible about it. Okay. So I'm chopping my onion using some of the techniques that we've used in the past. So I start by chopping it lengthways like this, and then I rotate it, and I chop it again. As I'm dicing the onion. Some people like to turn their blade horizontally and cut it like this before they do the next stage. I don't do that because I don't mind the texture of a bit of onion, and also because, in my opinion, and I'm ready to be corrected on this, but in my opinion, there are layers to an onion, and so cutting it horizontally doesn't make a lot of difference. Like so many recipes that I enjoy, the bulk of it is chopping stuff. Ooh. Oh my Lord, this is a very powerful onion. It's clearing out my sinuses. It's making my eyes water. I apologize if it's having the same effect on you at home. Okay, onions done, garlic done, whew, eyes watering. Good grief. Woo. Okay, next. I'm going to take a pot. I'm using one that is this size, a little bigger than my head. Oh, not even. My head is much bigger than this pot. Anyway, I'm going to turn on a medium heat. And I'm going to cook with olive oil today. You can cook with coconut oil. You can cook with vegetable oil. It's up to you. With a stew, it doesn't make as much difference. I'm sure that some people will argue about this, but to me, I can't tell the difference between a stew whose meat is cooked in olive oil versus a stew whose meat is cooked in something else. Okay, so now that I've got that added, I'm going to take, once I can tell that the oil is heated enough, I'm going to take my beef and I'm going to add it. The way that I will know that the oil is heated enough is that it will start to shimmer in the bottom of the pan, and I'll see a very pale white smoke rise from the bottom of the pan, which is something I think we talked about last week. I don't get to use my favorite wooden spoon because it's still covered with bread stuff, but this one will work just fine. I have a sort of sentimental attachment to my favorite cooking implements. I don't know if you do too. If you do, you can tell us about it in the comments there. Their favorite spatula or bowl or pot or pan you have. Okay, I think that our oil is just about ready to go, and if it's not now, it will be soon. So I'm going to add in my meat. You saw that there's a little bit of leftover flour that fell in as well. It's not the end of the world. That flour will just thicken the gravy. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take our meat and we're going to move it around at this medium heat. And our goal is not to cook it all the way through yet. It is to get a sear on it. We did this last week with the chicken as well. The reason why it's not important for us to cook the meat all the way through at this stage is because we know it's going to be sitting in a pot full of hot gravy, or in the case of the pad thai last week, hot sauce, for a while. So it will have a chance to cook all the way through. Also, unlike last week, we're cooking with beef, and beef has a much lower risk of undercooking than chicken does. If you undercook chicken, then you can get sick, but there are a lot of folks who eat their beef pretty raw, and they are okay. It depends upon your taste. You're still taking a risk, but it's not as big of a risk. I've heard that there are folks who live in Wisconsin who eat their ground beef raw, and they call it Wisconsin caviar. I've never tried that, but I'm curious about it. I would try it if somebody offered it to me. Okay, while that's cooking, I'm going to take my green onions and I'm going to chop those. There's no reason to wait on them, I just did. So the recipe doesn't call for green onions and yellow onions. When I saw onions on the recipe just now, I was like, oh yeah, and I got the yellow onion and I cut it up. But your recipe probably just calls for green onions, and that's fine. That's probably enough. But I love onions, so I'm going to use some of both. I'm not going to add all of the green onions either. I'm just going to add some of them, and then the rest of them are going to be garnish at the end that I will add to the top of my stew. Sometimes when people say garnish, what they mean is vegetation that they add just for appearance. So they don't actually end up eating it. They just like the way it looks. For example, a lot of people garnish pad thai with banana leaves, but they don't eat the banana leaves. In fact, some people use those banana leaves to actually scoop up the food that they're eating. In the case of this stew, and also the pad thai that we made last week, the green onions are garnished, but they're also for eating. And raw green onions taste different than cooked ones. Just like with yellow onions, when you cook the onion, it becomes much less potent, much less oniony. My dad used to cut up rings of yellow onions, and he would put them in a sandwich with sharp cheddar cheese and butter. And that is not something that everybody would enjoy, but it's something I liked. It makes your breath smell terrible, so make sure you save it for some time when you're not going to be around other people. Okay, our beef is cooked enough. So now we're going to add in everything that we've chopped. So I'm going to take my potatoes and my celery and my carrots. I'm going to take my garlic and my onion. I'm also going to add in some of my green onion, but not all. You can see I'm making a huge mess in my kitchen, but I don't know. I just kind of feel like if there's no mess, have you really cooked? I'm going to get it all mixed together. I'm going to leave the heat on, it's just fine how it is. But now we're going to add in our liquid. So the liquid we're going to add today is some broth and some water. The recipe oddly calls for chicken broth rather than beef broth, or vegetable broth would also be fine. I use bouillon for this. So this stuff here, it is admittedly higher in sodium, less healthy for you than if you were to buy broth at the supermarket or wherever else you get your broth, but it keeps for longer. And I always find that if I open some broth, I only use some of it, and then it spoils before I get to use the rest. So it feels less wasteful for me to use bouillon. So we are going to add 1 cup of broth. Now, one way that you can make the broth is by boiling water and then adding a teaspoon of your bouillon mix or a cube to your boiling water. I'm not going to do that. And some people may disagree with me about stew. Then I'm quickly going to mix it together so we don't end up with a really salty piece of beef. He says, but he loses his, there we go. You can do whatever you like. If you're using bouillon, then it's up to you. You can mix it together with boiling water before you put it in the mix. It's just not the way I do it. Okay. Next, the recipe calls for 3/4 of a cup of water. So I'm taking that saltiness from the bouillon and I'm making it less salty because I'm diluting it. I can already tell that's not going to be enough liquid for me, so I'm probably going to add in some more liquid as well. Some people really like their stew to be really chunky. They want it to be almost solid, you know. That's not me. I like it to be much more broth than that. So I am going to add some more broth to mine. That looks good to me, especially because I know it's going to be cooking down. The more I cook it, the more it will evaporate. I know that that's going to make my gravy or my broth thinner. But if I really don't like that, I can always add more flour after the fact. Okay. I'm going to bring that to a boil. I want to add in some salt and pepper at this point, but I don't want to do that if my broth is already really salty. So let's give it a try. Yeah, that's completely under-seasoned right now. So if I didn't add more salt now, then this would be a very bland stew. Okay, let's add in some pepper. And at this stage, you can add whatever seasonings you like. Whatever you think goes well in a beef stew. I think a lot of pepper is really good in a beef stew, so that's why I'm going for so long here. And then I'm just going to pull up my spice rack and I'm going to decide whatever else I think goes well. Let's see, maybe a bit of basil. Whole needles of dried rosemary in my food. Some people don't mind that. I don't care for it. So I'm actually going to chop them up a little bit smaller. Always makes a mess. And the basil. Alright, mix all of this together. And I can already tell just by looking that a lot of that beef is already well cooked. That's looking good to me. Here's something that you won't catch a lot of professional chefs doing, but I'm not a professional chef, I'm just a home cook. So I'm going to add a little bit more flour to my gravy because I want it to be a bit thicker. And I'll mix all of that together. There we go, that's more the consistency that I want. And then I'm going to let this come to a boil. Once it comes to a rolling boil, I'm going to cover the pot, and then I'm going to let it cook for 15 minutes. So that means that right now I have a bit of time to do some cleanup. This is something that I always do if I can. I don't like finishing a meal and then knowing that I have 30 minutes of work ahead of me. So if I can, while things are cooking, I do as many of the dishes as I can, at least the ones that are not being used at the moment. So that means that the only thing that really I can't wash is the stew pot. So I'm gonna get started. I have a dish wand here, and the top of it came off as I was trying to get the red stuff off with my wooden spoon. I'm realizing as I'm doing this that watching somebody wash dishes is maybe not the most compelling thing ever to watch on Instagram. So I'm just going to check in and see if anybody has anything to say or has said anything yet. Oh, wow. Looks like there are a number of y'all here. How cool is that? Lots of waves. Awesome. Well, it's good to see you here. Oh, we're at a rolling boil. So now I'm going to bring that down. I didn't start a timer. I'm going to start one now for, I think, I'll try 10 minutes. Let's see how that does. Now you get to decide whether you want to cover your stew or not. If you cover the stew, then you're going to be keeping a lot of the flavor inside the pot where it will intensify and get stronger. But also all of that water that is evaporating will just go right back down into the stew. So if you're looking to thicken your stew's gravy, then you keep it uncovered, and that way some of the moisture will evaporate and your broth will get thicker. I'm going to take a look here and see if I'm happy with the thickness of the broth. I think it could be a little bit thicker for me. I'm also going to check the seasoning. Actually, the broth is a good thickness. And I like that flavor too. So I'm going to cover this. That one's too big, that one's too small. Here's the Goldilocks lid. There you go. Ugh, what a mess. I hope y'all don't mind if I do a bit of cleaning, otherwise this is going to be a nightmare when I'm done. I'm wondering if in the comments y'all could share something that you've cooked or prepared in the past few weeks that maybe you've never made before. Even if I can't read it right now, I'd love to read it when we're finished. Something that I'd never made before was this particular kind of bread. I used to make bread all the time, but then time ran out for it, but now I have more time for that sort of thing. Put those over there for now. I'll tell you a little bit about how I'm going to serve this stew when it's all done. In fact, I'll even give you a preview. So I'll grab my ladle here. And I know that this won't be done yet. My potatoes won't be soft enough yet, neither will my carrots. But I'm going to take it like this. So I've got a little bit of stew in there right now. And then I'm just going to grab some of my green onions and add them to the top. Then I'm going to grab some of my bread. I'll cut a wedge of that. I'll put it on the side. And then I love having stew with bread because you can use it to sop up the gravy that you haven't eaten. And if it's too hot to eat, then you can eat your bread. You can dip it in there until it's cool enough, and then you're ready to go. So because this still has some more time to cook, I'm not going to make you all sit and watch me clean up my kitchen. And I'm also not going to make us all sit and watch a pot as it continues to boil. They even have sayings about how you shouldn't do that. So instead, I think I'll just say goodbye. After all, we've been going for quite a while. So thank you so much for joining me this evening. I hope you had a good time. I hope that you were able to make something delicious, or that you're ready to make something delicious soon. If you are worried about missing any of the steps, you should check out YouTube. If you follow Project Success, you will find this video on YouTube within the next, I would imagine, like even within the next hour. And you can remind yourself of some of the steps. We'll also be taking this video and we're going to be finding a place to post it very, very soon, where you'll be able to find everything that we've done so far in the Project Success Institute cooking certificate, along with all of our recipes and ingredients, and maybe even some videos that will let you know about some of the cultural roots of the dishes that we've been preparing. In the meantime, I hope you'll join us again next week. If you are part of any of our partner schools, and if you've been part of any of the certificate programs, you're welcome to join us tomorrow night at the Coding Certificate. All you got to do is to go to www.pslaunch.wordpress.com, and you will find a series of links that you can use to join us. If you'd like to join us and you know that now, then all you got to do is send me an email at jamesr@projectsuccess.org and let me know that you're interested in joining us. My voice is about to run out, as you can probably tell, so I'm going to let you go for now. Thank you so much. Have a terrific evening. And stay safe, stay healthy. Bye-bye.